A president who believed in honesty. A madman who believed God sent him to kill. And doctors whose arrogance proved more dangerous than the bullet itself.
This isn't just the story of an assassination. It's the story of how a nation watched its leader suffer slowly, painfully, because science refused to listen to truth.
In the summer of 1881, President James Garfield was shot at point-blank range. And he should have survived, but what came next was far more horrifying than the attack.
Corruption, delusion, failed medicine, and a race against time that America was destined to lose.
Welcome to Destiny of the Republic, a tale so shocking you'll struggle to believe it actually happened. Hello, everyone. I'm Emma, your host.
And I'm John, your expert.
And welcome to Book Podcast Zone.
Today, we are diving deep into a moment in American history that often gets lost in the shadows of Lincoln and Kennedy.
Right, but it's a story that arguably had a more devastating and certainly a more immediate impact on the actual machinery of government and, believe it or not, public health standards.
It is a truly profound tragedy. It's one of those moments where every single element, politics, mental illness, science, all converged in just the most catastrophic way possible.
So what's our mission for this deep dive?
Our mission today is really to use our sources to map out this collision. You have the promising life of a great political reformer, James A. Garfield, set against this backdrop of Gilded Age corruption and the just devastating hubris of the medical establishment at the time.
And we want to show you that his death wasn't just a random act of violence.
Not at all. It was a consequence that was built directly into the toxic systems of his era.
That structural failure is what makes the story so compelling and honestly so infuriating to read about. And to really grasp the full depth of this national wound, we have to start with the man himself.
James A. Garfield.
He was a truly uncommon president. He didn't just rise through the ranks, he basically built the ranks from nothing. He holds this remarkable historical distinction of being the last American president to be born in a literal log cabin.
Which is such a tangible symbol of poverty, but also of that American dream realized.
But he was so much more than just a political symbol.
Oh, absolutely. What's truly fascinating is that his rags to riches story wasn't just about, hard work. It was about sheer intellectual horsepower and an absolute pursuit of knowledge.
Right. Before he even got into politics, he was an academic.
A serious academic.
Yeah.
Before entering politics, Garfield was a classics professor and later the president of Hiram College in Ohio. We're talking about an academician who excelled in the most demanding fields of the time. He was a genuine intellectual.
I remember reading about his linguistic abilities. It sounds almost unbelievable today.
It really does. Our sources highlight this incredible, almost theatrical capacity for languages. He was famously known for being able to stand at a blackboard and write a complex question in fluent Latin with his right hand,
While at the same time?
while simultaneously writing the correct answer in ancient Greek with his left.
That's not a parlor trick.
No, it's not. It demonstrated a mind that was rigorously trained in the classics, capable of complex bilateral thought. And yes, he could quote Shakespeare in ancient Greek, which, that puts him in an entirely separate category from most political figures of the era. He was a self-made intellectual giant.
So this is the man who arrives at the White House. He's not a product of the patronage machine he inherited. He's a genuine intellectual reformer.
Exactly. And his ascent was just dizzyingly fast, almost accidental. He was the quintessential dark horse nominee in the bitterly contested 1880 Republican election.
The party was really tearing itself apart at that point.
Completely. It was so fractured that he emerged as this reluctant compromise candidate in a matter of months. This rapid, almost reluctant acquisition of the highest office, it just emphasizes the incredible fragility of political power in that post-Civil War era.
So he had immense moral authority.
Immense,
Well,
but very little political infrastructure to enforce his reformist agenda. He essentially went from debating curriculum reform to battling titans of corruption overnight.
and the political system he stepped into was designed to reward loyalty over merit. It placed a massive target on the back of anyone, like Garfield, who represented honesty and true civil service.
That idealism guaranteed a confrontation. But, as we've established, you can't have a tragedy without the antagonist, the polar opposite of Garfield's self-discipline and achievement.
Enter Charles Guiteau. If Garfield represented the absolute apex of self-made American success, Guiteau was a perfect, almost pathetic study in narcissistic failure and profound entitlement.
Guiteau's biography reads like a checklist of unsuccessful ventures. It's almost comical if it weren't so tragic. He failed the bar exam, so he couldn't practice law effectively. He tried to start his own religious community within the utopian socialist movement known as the Oneida Community.
And how did that go?
He was thrown out for being disruptive and, frankly, creepy. Then he went on to deliver these terrible sermons as a failed preacher. His failures weren't small, private things. They were public, they were repeated, and they were total.
But the core issue here wasn't just the failure itself, it was his interpretation of that failure.
Absolutely. His life was defined by this escalating delusion. He was, by any modern standard, acutely mentally ill. He was convinced that every failure was not his fault, but a sign that the world or society was just too small for his divinely mandated greatness.
So he believed the Almighty had chosen him for a mission.
For a high position, for greatness. And crucially, this wasn't just general mental instability. It was religious fanaticism, layered over this intense political entitlement.
And how did this obsession connect specifically to Garfield?
Well, when Garfield was running in 1880, Guiteau wrote this truly terrible, meandering speech supporting the Republican ticket. It was essentially never delivered, was barely read by anyone, and certainly had zero impact on the election.
But in his mind.
But in Guiteau's twisted mind, he had provided the intellectual foundation for Garfield's victory. Therefore, God mandated that Garfield repay him immediately with a high-level government post as a reward.
The psychological contrast here couldn't be sharper. Garfield achieves the presidency through decades of immense discipline, intellect, and genuine humility.
While Guiteau achieves absolutely nothing but expects so, the world owes him a high-paying job in Europe because he wrote one terrible pamphlet that nobody noticed.
And this is where the system matters so much.
Yes, the spoils system wasn't just a backdrop to this story, it was the very mechanism that validated his delusion. The culture of patronage was so deep, this idea that office was a reward for political loyalty, not competence, that even a deeply unstable, failing person like Guiteau could logically rationalize his entitlement to a position of power.
He wasn't thinking, I'll apply and maybe get an interview.
No, he was thinking, I am owed this job because I was loyal.
It's a terrifying thought, how quickly the trajectory of a great promising man can be fatally intersected by that of a narcissistic madman, all fueled by a corrupt system of political favors. It just sets the foundation for everything that follows.
Indeed. The stage is tragically set.
And on that note, this is a good place to pause. If you're finding this deep dive as compelling as we are, we'd really appreciate it if you'd like, subscribe, and share for more update. It helps us keep these stories coming.
Now let's delve deeper into that political structure that made this disaster almost inevitable.
When Garfield took the oath of office, the Republican Party was truly venomous. It was split between the stalwarts and the half-breeds. And this wasn't just a simple policy disagreement.
No, this was personal, entrenched warfare over the control of government jobs. It was about power and money.
This context is so critical because it explains Guiteau's twisted rationale for the murder.
It's everything. The stalwarts were the ultimate establishment figures. They were led by Senator Roscoe Conkling of New York, a politician known more for his magnificent wardrobe and his oratorical flair than for any actual legislation. They were the machine.
And they supported Ulysses S. Grant.
They supported Grant and were the firmest believers in the unrestricted spoils system. The idea that victorious politicians award every single government job, from ambassadors down to local mail clerks, to loyal supporters, regardless of qualifications.
And half-breeds.
They were the reformers, the moderates, led by Garfield. They advocated for civil service reform, believing a merit system was absolutely necessary to clean up the rampant corruption. To the stalwarts, the half-breeds were dangerous radicals, threatening their entire economic and political survival.
Conkling's political machine was the stuff of legends back then. What was the actual scale of his power in the late 19th century?
Conkling was a titan. His power was concentrated in the lucrative customs houses, particularly the New York Customs House, which processed massive amounts of federal revenue.
So controlling the customs house meant controlling thousands of appointments.
Thousands. Jobs that carried immense power, revenue, and kickbacks. This wasn't just about political loyalty, it was a massive personal fortune and an empire built on patronage. Conkling saw civil service reform not as a noble goal, but as a declaration of war against his very existence.
And Conkling fought dirty. He literally tried to crush Garfield's nomination.
Oh, he went all in. At the 1880 convention, Conkling delivered these impassioned, days-long speeches demanding a third term for Grant. He was attempting to use the stalwart bloc to completely neutralize Garfield. He saw Garfield as too independently minded, too dangerous.
And what a massive political miscalculation that turned out to
It
be.
was an incredible case of political irony. Conkling's aggressive, rigid insistence on Grant only alienated the moderate delegates. It actually galvanized support for the reluctant candidate, Garfield, who emerged as the compromise victor.
So his own tactics backfired.
Completely. This incident alone proved why civil service reform was so urgent. The country was tired of seeing its leaders decided by backroom deals and machine strong-arming. So now Garfield was president, but he was forced to unify a party whose most powerful boss had just tried to destroy him.
This inherent tension leads us right into Inauguration Day, March 4th, 1881.
And our sources vividly set the scene. It was a notoriously difficult day, heavy snow, brutal winds, really bleak conditions. This dramatic weather served as a sort of ominous curtain raiser for the high political tensions and the tragedy to come.
And somewhere in that crowd, Guiteau was waiting. For him, this wasn't a transition of power.
It was his payday.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is the fatal intersection where the assassin's delusion finally manifests physically. Guiteau saw the inauguration as the public validation of his divine mandate. He believed he had delivered the victory and was now owed a high position. The obsession was now dangerous, moving from his head into physical action, stalking the White House waiting for his reward.
And what exactly did this failed everything demand? Not just any job, but a specific, prestigious one.
The Paris consulship. It was highly desirable, a well-paid, largely ceremonial post in the cultural capital of the world. It offered prestige, comfort, and minimal actual work.
Perfect for a narcissist like Guiteau.
Exactly. He spent weeks in Washington, badgering administration officials, absolutely convinced that his appointment was imminent. He'd often show up at the White House demanding an audience with Garfield.
The administration, they must have been drowning in thousands of legitimate patronage requests from actual party workers. They must have found him laughable.
That they did. Our sources confirm that the White House staff treated Guiteau as an annoying, unstable crank. They essentially laughed him out of the building. They simply didn't have the capacity or, frankly, the awareness to recognize the escalating instability of this particular petitioner.
He just dismissed him as one of many.
One of many deluded job seekers the spoils system inevitably attracted.
And this rejection was the final trigger.
It solidified his persecution complex. He didn't just feel rejected, he felt betrayed by God's chosen leader. In his twisted logic, Garfield was now betraying the stalwarts and thus failing America.
So he convinced himself that removing Garfield would somehow fix everything.
He convinced himself that by removing Garfield, he would heal the party, elevate the stalwart faction back to power, specifically Vice President Chester Arthur, who was a Conkling protege, and in doing so, he would save the Republic. He wasn't killing for personal revenge in his mind, but for divine political necessity.
It's just staggering. The seemingly trivial act of laughing off a delusional job seeker had fatal consequences, and it illustrates the inherent danger of a political system that prioritized favor over stability and merit.
It's the ultimate cautionary tale. A corrupt system creates a climate that attracts the unstable, and when the unstable feel cheated, the entire republic pays the price. A price that was about to come due. And just before we get to that awful day, a quick reminder for me this time: like, subscribe, and share for more update. It truly helps us bring these deep dives to you.
The political powder keg finally ignited on July 2nd, 1881. Garfield, who was utterly exhausted after 4 months fighting the Conkling machine, a fight that included Conkling resigning his Senate seat in a dramatic fit of pique, was just ready to escape the suffocating Washington summer.
The scene is the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station, a central hub in D.C., around 9:30 in the morning. Garfield was actually in a good mood, lighthearted, looking forward to his trip to the New England coast. He was accompanied only by Secretary of State James Blaine.
And security.
Virtually non-existent for the president at the time. It just wasn't a consideration.
And Guiteau was waiting. He'd been stalking the area for days. He fires 2 shots at the president at point-blank range. One grazes his shoulder, and the other lodges deep in his abdomen.
The initial shock across the nation was just immense. This was only the second time a sitting American president had been assassinated, following Lincoln 16 years earlier. But here is the critical, maddening point that really defines this entire story.
The wound itself.
The initial wound, while serious, was survivable. The bullet was lodged behind the pancreas, but it did not strike any vital organs or major arteries.
He was killed by what happened next.
Precisely. The tragedy begins in earnest when Dr. Willard Bliss, the chief physician, took charge. And yes, his first name was Doctor.
You can't make this stuff up.
You really can't. Bliss represented the height of the 1881 medical establishment, a man of immense self-confidence, impressive titles, and just a devastating arrogance regarding emerging science.
The medical dogma of the era is almost impossible for us to comprehend today.
It's truly horrifying. Bliss was an absolute proponent of pre-germ theory medicine. The concept of antiseptic hygiene, which was being championed by Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister in Europe, was known, but it was widely dismissed by American elite doctors.
They saw it as what? Eccentric.
As effeminate, unnecessary, or unproven French science. They believed that relying on touch, feeling for the bullet with unwashed hands, was the mark of a skilled surgeon.
Tell us about the concept of laudable pus. It sounds so incredibly counterintuitive.
It's a core insight into the failure of 19th century medicine. Doctors of that era believed that the formation of pus, that thick, often yellow or green discharge, was a positive sign of healing. They called it laudable pus.
So they thought the pus was good.
They thought the pus was the body actively cleaning the wound, drawing out impurities. In reality, of course, pus is evidence of a massive bacterial infection.
So when Bliss proudly plunged his unwashed fingers and non-sterile instruments deep into the president's abdominal cavity,
He wasn't searching for a bullet. He was actively, repeatedly inoculating the president with septic organisms from the hospital environment and from his own hands.
that is just sickening. And it wasn't just Bliss, was it?
No, the malpractice was collective. Over the following hours and days, at least 12 different doctors, all of them eager to participate in this high-profile case and gain fame, took turns probing the wound.
A dozen doctors.
A dozen doctors. They inserted drainage tubes, they scraped tissue, and they transformed a relatively contained injury into a massive, festering septic cavity that eventually spanned half the president's torso. Every single intervention was, fundamentally, an act of septic infection.
The relentlessness of this probing must have been pure torture for Garfield.
It was absolute agony. And it's a clear, visceral example of institutional medical failure. They probed, they cut, they searched, repeatedly widening the pathway for infection, and in some cases, pushing the bullet even further into the tissue. Garfield's temperature spiked repeatedly. He developed raging fevers, chills, and abscesses that constantly needed to be drained.
So the president wasn't killed by the metal slug.
He was essentially killed by the pervasive Gilded Age contempt for hygiene and the relentless, non-sterile probing of his own physicians.
And while this medical tragedy is unfolding, one of the great minds of the era, Alexander Graham Bell, tries to bring cutting-edge electrical science to bear on the problem.
Bell understood the urgent need to find the bullet. He knew that locating it surgically would require knowing its exact location. So he dropped his work on the telephone and raced to develop what he called the induction balance.
A primitive metal detector.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
A primitive experimental metal detector. It was an act of both scientific genius and immense personal compassion.
And this device, it could actually locate the bullet, correct?
In theory, yes. The induction balance worked by generating a magnetic field. When a piece of metal, like a lead bullet, entered that field, it induced a small current, creating a detectable sound in Bell's connected earphones. But Bell faced two fatal barriers, and both were imposed by the medical establishment.
The first barrier being Dr. Bliss, of course.
Exactly. Bliss, protective of his authority and his reputation, severely restricted Bell's access to the president. He insisted that Bell only search the areas where Bliss was convinced the bullet was located, the areas they had already probed and inflamed.
So he wouldn't let him search the whole body?
Bliss flatly refused to allow Bell to search the left side of the president's body. This was medical dogma, completely overriding emerging technology.
And the final cruel twist of fate that truly cements this story as a historical tragedy.
The president was lying on an advanced, state-of-the-art metal coil mattress spring.
You're kidding me?
No. This piece of hardware, designed for comfort, created an enormous magnetic interference field that Bell's delicate instrument couldn't cut through. Bell later confirmed that his induction balance was working perfectly, but the interference from the metallic spring, a fact the doctors never thought to tell him, rendered his results confusing and inaccurate.
And the bullet?
The autopsy later revealed that the bullet had lodged harmlessly on the left side of his body, nowhere near where Bliss had insisted Bell search.
So the shooting was an act of political madness, but the subsequent medical care was an act of institutional arrogance, compounded by a simple metal spring that sealed his doom.
A tragedy defined by hubris, both personal and professional. It's hard to imagine a more perfect storm of failure. And on that thought, let's take another quick break. Your support means the world to us, so please do like, subscribe, and share for more updates.
The nation was then forced to endure this slow-motion execution over the entire summer of 1881. Garfield survived for 80 agonizing days after the shooting, an immense physical and emotional burden that captivated and horrified the entire country.
The suffering was relentless. Our sources detail the massive weight loss. Garfield lost over 80 pounds during his ordeal. He dropped from a strong 210 pounds to under 130. His body was essentially being consumed by septic poisoning, characterized by constant spiking fevers and waves of debilitating chills.
And imagine the communication challenge back then. This was before radio or television, yet the entire country was glued to the daily medical bulletins that were distributed via telegraph.
The pressure on the doctors, the family, and the administration was just immense. Every fever spike, every drained abscess became front-page news. And the procedures that were designed to mitigate the suffering were procedures designed only to manage the infection the doctors themselves had introduced.
So they were just chasing their own mistakes.
Constantly, they probed to drain pus, a procedure that brought momentary relief but was inherently agonizing.
And all this agony took place during the suffocating heat of a Washington, D.C. summer.
It was unbearable. The White House was not designed for summer relief, and the humid, stagnant air was torture for a man with a raging fever. This led to a desperate, last-ditch effort to save him, or at least to provide some comfort.
The move to the shore.
The decision was made to transport the president to Elberon, New Jersey, to a seaside cottage. This really showed the depth of public feeling for him, didn't it?
Absolutely. This wasn't just a medical transfer. It was a nationwide act of hope. To move the severely wounded president from D.C. to the Jersey Shore, engineers undertook an incredible feat.
They rapidly constructed a 3-mile-long temporary railway spur through forests and fields, specifically to allow the president's train car to roll directly onto the property near the cottage.
That's amazing.
It was America physically laying down its resources, its engineering might, praying on its knees for this man's recovery. It's a powerful image.
The entire nation collectively holding its breath for one man's recovery.
And this public vigil was held together largely by the incredible strength of the First Lady, Lucretia Garfield.
Her story is perhaps the most resilient aspect of this entire tragedy. When her husband was shot, she wasn't actually well herself.
No, not at all. She was recovering from a severe bout of malaria, bedridden at home. She was supposed to be the patient, yet when the news of the shooting came, she transformed immediately.
How did she manage that recovery while simultaneously managing a national crisis?
She overcame her own illness with this profound determination. She became an unwavering source of strength. She took control of the White House situation, filtering the barrage of often conflicting medical reports, managing the household, and most importantly, providing a steady, gentle, moral focal point for her husband. She made sure the political chaos was kept away from his bedside.
Our sources call her the strongest woman in America during that period.
And it was deserved. Her quiet role prior to the shooting was replaced by a profound public display of strength during the 80-day ordeal. She offered this poignant human element to the tragedy, reminding the nation that even while the Republic was struggling with political and medical failures, there was enduring strength and love at the heart of the crisis.
Her presence, her dedication, it must have given Garfield the will to endure for as long as he did.
I have no doubt.
The perseverance of both the president and the First Lady through this seemingly endless suffering just makes the eventual inevitable loss all the more heartbreaking.
A painful end to a very painful summer. And with that, let's take one last pause. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share for more update. It's the best way to support our deep dives.
James A. Garfield finally died on September 19, 1881. The official cause of death was a ruptured splenic artery, which was brought on by the massive abdominal abscesses.
A direct consequence of the infection, not the bullet's immediate trajectory. With the president gone, attention turned fully to the assassin, Guiteau, and the immediate necessity of justice.
The trial that followed was a critical test for the American legal system, specifically for the insanity defense.
Right. The prosecution needed to prove Guiteau was a calculating murderer. They feared that declaring him merely insane would embolden future political violence. What they got instead was perhaps the most outrageous courtroom spectacle in American history.
Describe his antics for us. It sounds like pure theater of the absurd.
It was pandemonium. Guiteau genuinely believes he was the real hero who saved the Republic by clearing the way for the stalwarts in Chester Arthur. His behavior was totally unrestrained. He constantly interrupted the proceedings, insulted the judge, berated the jury, and insulted the prosecution.
He wasn't just disruptive then.
He would flirt openly with women in the gallery, and, most famously, he would sing these self-aggrandizing songs and deliver spontaneous, terrible poetry to the court. Sometimes he'd even perform dance moves. He even tried to coach his own defense attorney, arguing that his defense should focus on the moral necessity of his actions.
How did the courts manage to maintain any sense of order with that level of chaos?
It was an absolute media circus. It tested the limits of judicial patience. The defense tried to argue that God was the ultimate culprit, claiming Guiteau was merely an instrument chosen by the divine.
But the prosecution pushed back.
They successfully argued that his elaborate planning, buying a special pistol with an ivory handle, specifically because it would look better in a museum, staking out the station, writing letters to the press, all of it proved he understood the moral and legal consequences of his action, even if he was profoundly delusional.
So they drew a line.
They successfully drew a line between political grievance and criminal insanity for the national audience.
And the public anger must have been immense, especially as the medical details of Garfield's slow death became clearer. It pointed fingers at the doctors, not just the assassin.
The autopsy report, which revealed the septic destruction of Garfield's body and the bullet's actual harmless location on the left side, was a public reckoning. It cemented the idea that the doctors had killed the president, but the anger was still directed at the man who pulled the trigger. The jury returned a verdict of guilty.
Which brings us to June 30th, 1882, Hanging Day.
Guiteau met his end with the same messianic theatrical delusion he'd shown all along. He was executed in Washington, D.C. He famously delivered a final, bizarre, self-aggrandizing poem titled, "I am going to the Lordy," reciting it as he walked to the gallows.
And the public climate surrounding his death.
Incredibly tense. Our sources describe an immense crowd, a large mob that had gathered outside the jail. The public grief, rage, and sense of injustice were palpable. The crowd had come to see justice served, and there were fears they might try to tear him apart. Guiteau was finally silenced, but the chaos he instigated had already permanently reshaped America.
And this is the critical takeaway, isn't it? Garfield's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a catalyst. His martyrdom, born from the failures of patronage in medicine, created an immediate and irreversible shift in American governance.
The legacy is threefold, and they all stem directly from those 80 days of public suffering. First, and most importantly, civil service reform.
The assassination was literally caused by the toxicity of the spoils system, a job seeker killing the president who denied him.
It was the unignorable crisis. The idea that a president could be murdered over a second-rate job appointment was the ultimate indictment of patronage. It provided the political urgency necessary to overcome the stalwarts and the machine bosses.
And that led directly to the Pendleton Act.
Less than 2 years later, in 1883, the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act was passed. This act fundamentally dismantled the spoils system by requiring that a portion of federal jobs be filled based on merit, not political loyalty, through competitive examinations. It created the Civil Service Commission and began the process of professionalizing the American bureaucracy.
Garfield's death broke the stranglehold of bosses like Conkling.
It did. Second, medical advancement. The clear, horrifying, and very public failure of the medical establishment to save Garfield, despite weeks of expert attention, forced an immediate internal confrontation within American medical science.
The autopsy was the key.
Exactly. When the results confirmed that Bliss and the others had repeatedly probed and infected the president, causing the septicemia, American doctors could no longer dismiss the concept of germ theory as eccentric European nonsense. Garfield's case became the gruesome, undeniable, high-profile example that forced the adoption of antiseptic procedures and Joseph Lister's protocols.
So his death accelerated modern medicine in the U.S.
By decades. It saved countless lives in the long run. And finally, the modern presidency. The sheer shock and the long period of presidential incapacity highlighted immense structural flaws in the executive office.
The country essentially operated without a fully capable executive for nearly 3 months.
Which raised profound questions about presidential succession and disability. It also initiated the eventual adoption of more robust security details for the president. Garfield's suffering underscored how critical stability was, leading to long-term changes that were eventually codified in the 25th Amendment.
A preventable death leading to irreversible institutional change. It's a profound symmetry. The political system produced the murderer, and the medical system produced the death, and both systems were forced to change as a result.
The tragedy of one man's suffering became the necessary foundation for the modernization of the Republic.
So as we conclude this deep dive, it's just astonishing to realize how many monumental changes trace their origins back to that terrible summer of 1881.
We saw three major historical nodes converge. You had the failure of political patronage, which provided the motive and the climate for Guiteau's entitlement. You had the catastrophic failure of 19th century medicine, rooted in arrogance and the dismissal of life-saving science.
And finally, the ultimate tragedy of misplaced hubris.
Both Guiteau's messianic complex and Dr. Bliss's fatal professional pride. Those two things define the suffering and the outcome.
James Garfield should have survived. The fact that he didn't fundamentally change the presidency and public health standards forever.
It's a shortcut to understanding the entire transition from the corruption of the Gilded Age to the beginnings of modern American governance. You were looking at the moment institutions were forced to modernize because the public watched, day by day, as an institutionally flawed system destroyed its leader.
So we want to leave you with this final provocative thought to explore on your own. If Dr. Bliss had been a man of humility, if he had listened to Alexander Graham Bell, or if he had heeded the radical invisible germs theory in July 1881, and President Garfield had survived, would the political pressure for civil service reform have been strong enough?
Would the stalwarts have been defeated without the martyrdom of a sitting president? How critical was Garfield's agonizing suffering, the public spectacle of his slow death, to the necessary and immediate passage of the Pendleton Act and the medical reforms that followed? Did the Republic need the wound to turn septic for the reform machine to finally start turning? It challenges the entire narrative of political progress.
Thank you so much for joining us for this incredibly detailed deep dive into the destiny of the Republic.
We hope this has given you a fresh perspective on a moment in history that is often treated as a simple footnote, but which truly defined the modern course of the country.
Until next time, keep exploring the hidden stories that shape our world.
Continue to think critically and question the status quo in all its forms.
Goodbye.
Farewell.